CE since version 1.2. And yes, actually did a couple of very tiny implementations under 1.2, mostly contact management, and then 3.0, 4.0, and started working with PSA solutions in the early part of the last decade. And that led me to building out an end-to-end solution for a firm called TriBridge back in the day. And that led me into then working with Microsoft Dynamics 365's project service automation, now called project operations. So it's a pleasure to be here and to talk about what this solution is and how it benefits our industry, how it benefits our clients, and really who is a client for this. So to understand that, let's take a little bit of a history lesson just to kind of walk back in time as to how have we done projects and project operations in the past? Well, even before we had paper and pencil, as you see on the left, and that is actually a rendering of my sunroom. The numbers are all fictitious and a few other things are fictitious, but when you take a look at some of the history of projects, I mean, you don't need to go too far back, just maybe the pyramids or some other huge monumental projects throughout history. Everything's had a project plan. And I bet the Pharaoh was probably worried about cost overruns, missed deadlines, missed milestones, all the same things that we worry about today. And we've advanced from paper, which this, ironically, I ran into this last week as I was going through some stuff, and I'm like, oh, that would be cool to show. It's actually an actual project sheet that you build out yourself. I thought that'd be kind of cool to show. But we've gone from that to Microsoft Project, and Microsoft Project I've used since like 1997. I think a lot of us have. It's built out some really great work breakdown structures where you can put your statement of work hours in, you can put your duration in, you can really utilize the Gantt chart to be able to visualize the project across a timeline to really what is modern today, which is project operations that combines all of this together. Except for the paper, we really don't need paper anymore. But we've seen Primavera out there, and quite frankly, a lot of people use Excel spreadsheets. They do. I've used them. I've even used PowerPoints to do my project plans. So there's no condemnation here as to what you've been using. There's just a better way in which we can build out our projects. Some of the solutions that I've seen out there, let's kind of go into a little bit of a ranking to understand how all of this fits together. And these are my opinions only. So I've put all the players on here. Depending upon how I feel in a certain day, I might even shuffle some around. But on the lower left, we have kind of your typical PSA solutions, some that are fairly modern, like Microsoft Projects and Project Online, or Project for the Web as it's called, or Microsoft's actually rebranding it as just, again, Project, and it's delivered through the web. That is a fabulous Gantt chart rendering, and now more of a Kanban or an agile kind of view of projects, and we'll see that here in a moment. It still remains very top of the list, very, very much top of the list. Kind of running neck and neck under that is Maven Link and Smartsheets. Maven Link is a project operations kind of solution that's been out there for a very long time. It is very sophisticated. It's also very expensive, as well as we see a lot of smart sheets and Excel. And I put Unit 4's Assistance PSA in here because I still see them out there. On the accounting side of things, though, there are solutions such as NetSuite projects, and they call it NetSuite SRM services, relationship management. It is kind of an ERP product for projects. Sage Intacct is out there, Deltek, Solomon Software, kind of older architecture, but it's been out there. I cut my teeth in project accounting on Solomon Software, now Dynamics SL. And then at the very top of the list, project operations from Microsoft, of course, NetSuite OpenAir, and Kimball's out there as well. If you've not heard of them, actually had some interaction with them last year that was good, but not the same as project operations. So what is this solution? Project operations is an integrated end-to-end solution for professional services firms. We're going to talk about who they are here in just a moment. It starts in the CE sales side. Dion, I really appreciated seeing everything that you were showing there because it just literally, it fits. It's all the front end to really great stuff that goes on in sales that gets you to a point to where you are performing a quote and then a project contract, which then is where project operations takes over. In project operations, then you have all of your project management, your resource management, and all of that good stuff, which then goes into the ERP solution. So as a project program or practice manager, this is your end-to-end day-to-day solution. And you know, the problem that solves, I think we all know, and this is what we do every day. It solves the disparate systems and disconnected work environment, which, as we all know, has only been exacerbated by the new ways to work and the work from home and just this overall way in which we are finding ourselves now. The professional services industry. This is a slide Microsoft has shown in the past, and it's a good slide to kind of narrow it in and dial it in. But really, if you were to ask me, is XYZ company a project operations prospect? The question really is, are they a services-based company, or maybe not a services-based company, but a company that lives and breeds projects? And what I mean by that is historically, actually back in the early 2010s, I implemented a PSA solution based upon assistance software, ironically, in an IT firm that deployed point of sale systems to Charmin Charlie's, Giant Eagle, and a number of big retailers across the United States. They had on the front end the need to configure their units, then put a deployment plan together, and then they actually had a field service component afterward. Well, they don't necessarily show up on this list, but everything that they did was buy the project, they estimated the project, they billed the project, they checked their profitability by the project. That's a project operations function. So even though this kind of dials it in, anyone that's actually tracking their project health, their project costs, their project sales, those are key things just to remember is a project operations client. The personas involved here, and these are, again, from Microsoft, just some general personas, but some personas that I work with all the time is your COO, your practice director. they have some really key needs that they need to be able to see in the system in the way of visualization of data, dashboards, and being able to track their practice health and also predict their practice health in the future and be able to make key decisions on where to maybe capture new market share, new customers, how much they'd be willing to really spend to get a new project or not. The account manager, that's your salesperson. That's the person that typically called business development with, or maybe even customer success managers within the professional services or the project world. This is the person that is doing some high level planning, some estimating. They are working typically with a practice director or a project manager to come up with a work breakdown structure of generally what's this project going to look like. The project manager, we know that the project manager, they're the one managing all of the end-to-end processes. The partner manager may be working with outside firms to bring in talent to deliver on solutions. Very common, especially within services firms, to have relationships with other firms that you would utilize in that capacity. The resource manager is concerned primarily about getting people, the right people with the right skills onto a project. That's their main concern. That's their number one key issue. The team members really just want to put their time and their expenses in, and they want it to be efficient. And then the project accountant, they want this information to be proper for the project accounting that needs to take place. And in some cases, complex ASC 606, IFRS 15 kind of accounting. So some really complex accounting processes. To visualize this, there are a number of things that really make up the Dynamics 365 project operations solution. And I've highlighted some of those here. The CE components, the project operations components being Microsoft Project, Power Apps, Automate, Power BI, part of the Power Platform. These are all solutions that make up the overall Microsoft framework as it relates to project operations. So a quick interjection here, because project operations is designed to be end-to-end. On the sales side, you have Dynamics 365 CE. In the middle, you have PSA, and on the ERP side, you have finance and operations. More frequently than not, it doesn't end up playing out that pristine. And one thing I talk about in my book is that, doing all three of those components is a real heavy lift for an organization. It really is. I think you guys are probably already keying in on that. So many times we will implement PSA and integrate to another ERP. Could be a tier 1 ERP, such as SAP. It could be Dynamics 365 Business Central with some of the integration tools out there. Also on the CRM side, it's not unusual to have Salesforce.com integrated on the front end with the accounts, with quotes that become project contracts, other things like that from Salesforce into the project world. And then it becomes part of the PSA infrastructure. So when you're thinking about project operations, and as we talk about it today, we're really going to focus on the CE side, and we're going to talk about the other ancillary components, but we're going to focus on the CE side. We're going to make sure that we kind of give that its due. The finance and operations piece, as you may know, if you've worked with ERP solutions, that's a pretty heavy lift of implementing the F&O piece. So that part, we're not going to go into a lot of depth today. So what is project operations? I'd like to demystify it for people a little bit because um, it is a new name. We all know that Microsoft loves to come up with new names, and I have to say, I actually agree very wholeheartedly with the name project operations, because if I look back on my 24 years of history in this world, I've worked in project operations throughout the entire 24 years, not the project operations solution, but all of the solutions that have made it up from Microsoft Project Server. I mean, even in the early 2000s, like 2003, we were setting up Project Server and integrating to Dynamics SL to create a project operations environment. So this stuff's been around. It's just never been really quite powered the way that it is today. And that's the key. There's this power of the Microsoft 365 framework, the Dynamics 365 framework, and everything that goes along with it that we've just not had before. It's unprecedented. So Project Operations is version 4.0 of what was Project Services Automation that was introduced in 2016. I was part of that initial introduction and could not have imagined where it's gone in just 4 or 5 short years. It's really pretty cool. The 4.0 environment has new features and capabilities, task schedules, task board, Gantt views, billing improvements, contract improvements, and the integration all the way through, utilizing dual write technology to do that. When we break it down, we can take a look at across the top the functional areas. We can see in the end-to-end deployment, kind of the division of labor, if you will, between customer engagement in the middle and finance and operations represented on the bottom. So your sales activity on the left, that as well as project planning ends up coinciding across both solutions. And then primarily your resource planning, your time and expense, if you're using the expense module. Now, you may also be using Concur, you may be using Gorilla Expense, any number of expense modules, or you may even use the expense module within finance and operations with all of the policy and the enforcement that it has. That time and expense and resource scheduling purely within PSA. Project execution and invoicing, very much there's some crossover there. Revenue recognition. You know, when it comes to revenue recognition, your ERP solution is going to be the best place for that. And then analytics goes across the spectrum of customer engagement and finance and operations. How it integrates is, and this is project processes integrated to F&O. There is also a very similar model that you can use for any accounting system, where on the left-hand side, you're doing your project stuff. You enter time, time gets billed, or you may have billing milestones. All of that's going to turn into data that goes into the accounting system, the ERP system, either through an integration ledger going into project transactions, or you're going to have your pro forma invoice coming over as project invoice. These are all some pretty common integration points. And in fact, again, going back to some historical perspective on this, not uncommon that we've had this kind of model around for a while, and this is a proven model. This is a proven way to get information from a sales and project-oriented system into a highly structured accounting system. So let's jump into the solution and go through a few things just to show you. And I'm not going to go deeply into the opportunity to quote, because I think you've seen that with the on session, probably with other sessions, you've seen that over and over. But I do want to talk about the quote contract and the project management, the new schedule board. We'll take a look at that. We'll talk about Teams integration, time entry through Outlook, and billings, and how this all actually comes together. So let me go ahead and go to my browser here. Now, when we go into the dashboards area, you'll notice that we do have dashboards in here for the practice management group. We have a resource manager dashboard, as well as some sales activity and some other dashboards. All of this is what comes out of the box. Now, typically what we're doing is really integrating Power BI in here and putting together some more sophisticated dashboards for our users. Let's jump into and talk about what we were saying is at the front end of the solution, and that is the quoting. Okay, so this quote is one, and this particular quote, this is a project related quote. It has all of the typical stuff that you're used to seeing within a quote, with some variations. There is a contracting unit, which is relevant to how this particular project is going to be staffed. That plays directly into the costing of the roles that are used. And the roles are like your solution architect, a director, a developer, any number of roles that are going to have a cost, typically a blended cost, that doesn't give away all the confidential information of how much does this person make by factoring out that cost per hour times 2080, and bada boom, we have some math. But instead, it holds the costs that are agreed upon by the organization. Now, when I go into the quote lines here, these quote lines, these are actually a couple of different lines. One is a project-based line at the very top. The bottom are the product-based lines. Now, the product-based lines, these are like licenses, things like that, that you would want to put into there. There's also materials. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But this is how the pricing of quote lines, which become contract lines, it gets generated. Now, project price list. This actually gets fun because your projects, if you're working in a role within your firm to where maybe you are doing some estimating, you know that the firm has their regular rates. I've heard it called rack rate. I've heard it called rate card, retail rate, whatever the case may be. But those rates are the rates at which you generally price a role. But for this customer, you know what? They get special pricing. So for a solution architect, a developer, a consultant, they have their specific rates just for them. But then you know what? There are the rates that are applicable to just this project because, well, we had to roll up our sleeves and cut a really good deal for this project. And these rates are very specific to the project. Notice that this is labor sales price, new project need, 2/2/2021 at 10:07 p.m. Wow, I was working late that night. Okay, so the context of this is a sales price list, meaning it's not a cost price list. Remember that cost price list ties directly to the contracting unit. It is in the US dollar, and its time unit is an hour. In here, we specify, here are the role prices for this, again, specific to the project price list. So you see the role, the resourcing unit, the unit, and then the price and the currency. And you can also do some other things in here, such as you can do some role price markups, put some price list items in here. I won't go into all of the details of this, but just know that you can get very sophisticated with pricing. A quote, when it is won in the Dynamics 365 sales world, becomes an order, right? I think we all have learned that through the years. Well, it's exactly the same thing within project operations. Notice my project contract here is an order. And these contract lines are actually order lines. So a lot of the things that maybe if you've worked with sales and you're just looking at project operations, you may be saying, okay, how does this translate? Well, here's one of the translation points. And in here, we get to see the actual price list that's applied to this. We can look at the project contract lines. And the way that I structured this particular project contract is that I built it out with a fixed price of $125,000 plus an out of scope kind of a contingency bucket, if you will, that is time and materials. Plus I have the product-based licenses in here. Now, the reason I did it this way, this is actually the project that I used in my book, and it was really refreshing to get to the end of the book and see it actually all come together exactly the way I was hoping it to. But this is a pretty typical project. I mean, you have maybe a fixed price, but you also have some protection on both parties to say, and we're going to have a contingency bucket. We can look at contract performance. We can see overall contract, billed amount, cost incurred, gross margin information, and some project-based line information as well. How much have I billed in the out of scope? And then if I want to dig down into that, I can dig down a little deeper. And a few other things are here for you to be able to see, such as project invoices. So I can see all the invoices that I created. My first milestone billing, a product-based billing, and out of scope billing. So now, let's actually go into a project and take a look at this project and how it was set up. So a little bit of a quick reset. Each contract line ties to a project. You can also tie contract line information down to the task level, and that's something that I shared in the book as well. And this particular project takes advantage of all that. So let's decompile. Yeah, let's just kind of take apart this project a little bit. This is the summary tab, and the summary tab is going to have all the stuff you would expect, including project operations, contracting unit. We also have some snapshot numbers behind the estimates and the actuals. We have a status section here. What I do recommend, I didn't do it for the book, not quite sure why, maybe I just lost track of it, but I do recommend typically putting that status on its own tab in its own area to where the project manager can keep up with status reporting in there. When I do that, I also add a timeline so that they can put status updates into a timeline and have that as kind of a system of record of how the project is going. And I add a number of fields, like, we have this red, yellow, and green kind of overall project status. Yeah, that's good, but I typically prescribe for clients. I also have, some sort of budget awareness or some sort of scope creep awareness, any number of other factors that are important for you. And here's how you use it then. Everything's all green, everything's all good, no issue. But guess what? You turn one of these flags yellow, still no issue. But you turn 2 flags yellow, kick off a workflow to maybe the program manager or somebody else and say, we just had 2 yellows on this project. You might want to check in with Robert and see what's going on. There could be a problem here. So that's one of the key things that I like to espouse people to do. Going across here, these are some of the key areas that I'll focus in on. These are your tasks, and your task can be broken out into a work breakdown structure, very much like we have here. We can see the percent complete across these tasks. Notice I put some time against out of scope, and we can see when the finish is, and I am so overdue on this project. Notice as it re-rendered there, it's actually rendering project for the web, or project, or project online, whatever you want to call it. This is actually a rendering of that solution. Now, that means that you do have to have a project license with project operations, or you get a really nasty error and you can't utilize this. Notice in here, I have the ability to create more of an agile Scrum board, if you will, as well as then on the timeline side, we can render a timeline that, let's see, I am actually way out of date here. So let me go back to March 1st, and we can see our timeline, dependencies, drag and drop, all of that good stuff that you're used to. On the team side of this, our team is made up of generic resources, which first come in that become actual resource requirements, as well as team members that are real resources. Well, none of these people are real except for that Robert How to Shell guy. He is real. And you can see across here their roles and which roles they are assigned. Resourcing units, so you can pull from other resourcing units. Start and finish date, required hours, and hard booked hours. Hard booked meaning you can book to this project these specific people so that they're locked in. You can also soft book people, and we'll talk about that here in a moment when we take a look at the schedule board. On the resource assignment side of things, we have the ability to see basically day by day, week by week, who's assigned what number of hours on a project. Resource reconciliation, not quite frequently used, but its intention is to kind of true up the assigned hours versus the booked hours. Again, nothing I'm really going to dig into here. I do want to talk about the estimates tab because I think this is really important. When taking a look at a project revenue forecast, there's no better way of being able to see what's forecasted across a timeline, week, month, year, whatever the case would be, than here. This is project by project. This does require having a sales price list assigned to the project contract for this to work. If you get zeros here, it's because you don't have a sales price list. If you get zeros on the cost side of this, yes, it does show the cost side as well. If you get zeros on the cost side, it's because you don't have a role cost set up for that contracting unit. Let's go into a couple of other things. Task billing setup. I set up some task billings for each of these, each of the elements of a project, so that we could get really specific as to what's included at a task level. For your more complex, your more sophisticated project accounting kind of environments, this is a must. You must have this. Expense estimates. If we're going to be traveling, assuming that you are taking some flights and things like that, yes, you can put some estimates in here and then track those costs. And then material estimates. If you know that you're going to have some specific materials, you can put those in here as well. So now, when we are at the team level and we have a generic team member like this, we can generate a requirement that then shows this on the schedule board as a requirement that needs to be fulfilled. That's this particular requirement right here. We can select find availability, and it will find somebody that's available. Right now, there isn't anyone available because of just basically the way I have the system set up. But my data is kind of old because it's back in March. But we can also come in here and we can come into the characteristics rating, and we can find somebody who is Dynamics 365 CE, Advanced, Expert, or Standard, and search to find somebody that fits that criteria. Hey, William Michaels does. We can also search within our roles, any of our roles, to see who also fits as an architect. We can use territories, organizational units. All of these things are available to you as filters. Now, the sophistication of this is that you can add to this, you can modify the search, you can save this as a view. So you can come in here and take a look at a saved view and see specifically the information that you want to see to find the right people to work on your projects. Now, this view looks nice. I think we'd all agree that's a nice view. But there is a preview of a new schedule board in which, talking to Microsoft, they're like, oh, that works for you? Okay, so this preview is working because it just happens to work right now with the project data. I'm going to be really frank with you. It's forthcoming as a more sophisticated scheduling view. But isn't this much more elegant to be able to see during these weeks, specifically the number of hours that a person is booked and what they have available? This allows you then to really have a modern way of looking at your schedule board. And the future on this is it too will have customization, parity to what has been in the system previously. So now, once you have a team member assigned to a project, they're booked. Now they go through time and they do some time entries. There are multiple ways of doing time entry within project operations. And I want to state that to think that there's only one way to do time entry would be to think there's only one way to get Starbucks. There are multiple ways to get Starbucks. Time entry, there are some people that like just doing it the old-fashioned way. There are some people that'll come in here and they will just put in 8 hours on Monday, 8 hours on Tuesday. They will add their notes, and that's fine. No problem there. However, there are some people that they want to be able to pull in their resource assignments from what they are assigned to on projects. And so I can come in here and I can pull in and import my resource assignments of what I was directly booked on or directly scheduled on this project. And then I can say, I want to remove this, 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 remove them, bring the rest in. It makes it automatic and really easy. The same thing exists for importing from bookings and from exchange appointments. Now, let me show you the difference here. Let's hit refresh here just to see if our bookings came in or our resource assignments. They didn't. Okay, not sure why that didn't happen. But here I'm going to import from Exchange. And what this is going to do is go out to my Outlook calendar and pull in Power Platform. Oh, what was this? Oh, Power Platform Community. That's this, as well as Father's Day. Don't want to bring Father's Day in. So I'm going to click on Father's Day, click Remove. And so that brought that line in from my calendar. Now notice though, I do have to come in here and categorize this to a project, a task, and my role, save and close. Now, that's good. That gets you a line into your project. You can also go to Outlook, and this takes a little bit of configuration. I'll share with you what the configuration is. You can go to your Outlook appointment. Let me drag this over here. And not that one, pardon me. This one. I can come in here and click the Dynamics 365 button, and it will allow me to input my time directly on a right rail over here. I have this configured to where I can directly put in an account, a contact, or a time entry. So I can put my time entry in here. And when it comes back, and select my project task, I can put in my role and click Save and Close. Now, that's one way of getting your information in through Outlook. The other way was to import. And then the moment that you do that and you have all of your time brought in, you have, like, for example, this particular entry, it has the notes in here, Power Platform Community. We could put some external notes that are billing notes. Once you do this, come in here, click Submit. This submits it for approval. And without going through all of the typical stuff that you need to do in the way of approvals, just know that you can come in here, see all of your approvals, whether it be time, whether it would be expenses, whether it would be materials, anything that's going to be charged to a project. You as the project manager are doing those approvals. Now, at this point, what happens is, and it's two different ways in which this can happen. One is you can simply take all of the approved transactions and push them out to the accounting system and have the accounting system do the billing. The other thing that you can do is you can bill directly out of project operations, but know that it's more of a pro forma kind of contract or pro forma kind of billing. So I'm going to open the contract here. And in here, when I have maybe approved some items, let me go back to approvals. Actually, let's go ahead and approve these 4 items. And we'll go back to the project contract. And in here, I can click create invoice. And now that those items have been approved, this will create an invoice that's a pro forma invoice that you can actually render out of here. You can customize it. Oh, one step I missed. Come into my actuals and take a look at my time and material billing backlog and mark these items as ready to invoice. My apologies there. So now I'll come back here and click my create invoice, and it will create an invoice for me. Again, this is more of a pro forma invoice. And by pro forma, I mean, number one, it doesn't have taxes on it. Number two, it's not going to have explicitly GL postings on it. Now, yeah, you could do that, but it is going to instead really be something that you could present to a client as, hey, this is what it's looking like, market pro forma, and then have the accounting system actually do the invoice with the sales tax. So at this point, we have an invoice. We can actually utilize this to print out for the customer as a pro forma, or we can pass it to the accounting system. Notice we can also use Teams to collaborate throughout Microsoft Project and project operations. I will say what Dion mentioned about forthcoming improvements within the whole Teams environment also exists here. One thing that I've done is I've included within Teams, very much like she was showing you, the project as well as time entry kind of rendered within here, as well as then the ability to put some chat and some notes around it. That's something that also can be set up, and the setup processes, you can probably go out to D365 feeds or a few other places that can talk to you about exactly how to get this all set up. A simple plug for my book, it's also in there too, but not secret knowledge. Let's just say that. So this is generally what you can do with Teams today. Where it's going though is, as you probably know, there's just going to be this overall unified environment. And the benefit of that is the context switching. I mean, notice I went from one browser to Teams to, from one browser to another actually. And we'll talk about why here in a moment. But that context switching is really something we want to minimize, because we really want this. We want our users to be able to do their work and do it efficiently without having to have their fingers on the Alt-Tab button all the time. That's really important. So let's kind of round out things by going back here. I wanted to tell you a couple of things. Now, this is a new solution. Yes, it's a new name for something that's been through 3 previous versions, but this is a big overhaul of the scheduling pane. And I just want to point out that there are times where if you are utilizing project operations and this rendering does not render, it may give you an error. It may just give you a blank frame here. If you encounter that, 9 times out of 10, you're blocking third-party cookies, like everybody is, you know. And apparently Google has just pushed out the deadline to go cookieless to 2023 now. But third-party cookies is typically what blocks that. The other block is typically a license. You do need to have a project license for this to work. That even means at the automation level. If you are using the Schedule API to automate tasks, yeah, you need to have that license set up. There's some behind the scenes stuff that we don't have time to go into, but just know that this piece, once you get set up, once you know what you're working with, you're good. Something changed on my Microsoft Edge since I was working with this, to where literally I was scrambling as I was getting set up for this. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to open up Chrome. And it rendered fine in Chrome and all was well. So just a little bit of behind the scenes stuff there. With that, I am going to go back here to the overview and then jump into the project operations deployment journey. Something that I wrote about here, it was written for the larger audience of, you know, are we going to be using an ERP system that's not finance and operations? Or are we going to be using finance and ops? Are we already on Microsoft 365? I've worked with firms that are not. So, you know, there are a lot of very high level kind of journey questions that need to be shared, that need to be talked about to determine, you know, are you ready to embark on this even? Because it is a big deal. It's at the very least a big lift within the project operations side, but it's also a lift on the CRM and the ERP side as well. In this step 4, really, you need to identify what is your deployment model. Are you doing a CE only model, kind of like what we've shown here today? Or are you doing an integrated mode where you have project operations and resourcing and everything tied together with F&O? Or is it more of an F&O centric deployment, which is primarily around production orders and manufacturing kind of information? Some things that I see clients asking for all the time, and there's a whole lot more than this. Change order management. Project operations does not have change order management written into it, and a lot of people handle that differently from firm to firm, from company to company. Time scheduling, entry, and management. Also, something that people handle differently from firm to firm. Outlook and Teams integration, yeah, those are some things that people will look for and will want to utilize. SharePoint and document management. You can, and I see this frequently, and actually take a few arrows on this. You can do a number of different document management uses within project operations. So follow along with me. You may have a document system that's part of your contract system for your master services agreement, your statement of work, and other legal documents. Then you may have a SharePoint site that is an external facing customer SharePoint site. That's where you put out your status reports for them to access and any number of good project methodology documents. Then you may have a Teams document management site that is more around your internal collaboration. So there's a whole conversation we could have around that. Integrations to other ERP solutions, all tiers, tier 1 all the way through. Revenue recognition, and a whole lot more. So with that, if you want to scan the QR code, I will pause here for a moment. It will take you to Amazon. You can buy the book if you would like to. I started writing this book in Q4 of 2020 and finished it in Q1 of 2021. That was a fun journey in and of itself. It was a lot of late nights, as you could see by the timestamps on some particular items, but it was a fun journey. It was really quite cool. And if you want, you can also go out to Pact Publishing to look for this. So now the last slide here is just simply to say thank you. Find out if there are any questions, QR code to my LinkedIn, and are there any questions that I can answer for the group here? I know we are also giving away a book, so we will be giving away a book to some lucky audience member.
That is correct, Robert. We will be awarding prizes. One of them is a printed copy of your book. The winners will be announced on Monday, I believe. So I know some of the winners have already been selected throughout the day. So the final list of winners will be awarded by Monday. I think we're just waiting to see how many of the attendees are being interactive and sharing the information that they're learning throughout the day. Robert, quick question. Are you on Twitter as well, or just LinkedIn?
Just LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, great.
I would have loved to have been a Twitter person, but I just didn't have the amount of activity. So.
No, that's fine. Okay, well, we've shared the information about your book in the chat. I'll share it again for those who want to get the 35% discount. Doing that now. There you go. So again, Robert, that was a really, really, really insightful introduction to project operations. You've shared a deep history as well as the practical implications of implementing it. So I just want to thank you for that. That was really, really insightful and highly valuable to the community. So it is midnight in GMT time. I believe, yeah, it is midnight now. So. And it is the last session, so thank you for doing that as the last session. In terms of questions, I think there was one question, which is by Ali, which is, hi, Robert, can you give examples of when you would want to extend the schedule board functionality? I mean, known limitations that you have encountered. Is there a list somewhere of what you have had to do to deliver those limitations?
There are some limitations you do run into, but primarily the extension of the schedule board is going to include additional parameters that you use in scheduling. Maybe you have a flag for a specific type of resource that you want to pull in, and you want to include that, or various characteristics that are not captured within skills or any of the other filters. That is the most common, as well as when you're saving your schedule board, you can save it with a lot of other settings applied, so that then when you go into it, think of somebody working in the RMO, the resource management office. They have a certain way of looking at what's going on in the business, what's coming in, what do they need to staff. They will generally have their own schedule board that they use then to find the best fit and the best staffing. They may also focus on project priority or other things like that that are not currently captured in the system. So that would be something you would add.
Well, thank you, Robert. So we've gone well over the time, but it was a great pleasure to host you today. So we just want to thank you once again for your great
Thank you.
presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And feel free
Right.
to connect with Robert on LinkedIn. You have his email there as well if you have any further questions.
Have a great evening.
The 35% promotion will continue throughout next week as well.
All right. Have a great evening, everyone.
Well, thank you, Robert. Much appreciated. And may the power be with you all.